I've done a number of high-profile evacuations. In 2012, when your American ambassador was killed in Benghazi, I was there that evening, and I evacuated an oil company from Benghazi to Tripoli. 2 years later, I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya, 18 military and 4 diplomats, and then a couple of years passed, helped with the evacuations in Afghanistan. So it's something I'm quite familiar with.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Dean Stott. You are a former Tier 1 operator with the Special Air Service. Hey, have you ever watched that? There's a, God, I can't remember what the name of the show is. I think it's on Netflix, but it's like a short document, or not short. It's a like kind of a tongue-in-cheek biopic about how SAS got started in the first place. It's really funny.
Oh, Rogue Heroes?
Yeah, Rogue Heroes. God, it's so good,
yeah.
man. Those people were fucking maniacs.
Yeah, I was back in UK back in January, getting my green card, and it was the first time I got a chance to watch it because it was on BBC originally. But it's from a book. They did a book about how the SAS were formed, and it is almost true to the documentary. They weren't your normal types of soldiers. These were like literally rogues. Those are pretty much done fighting and everything else. Because a lot of people were sending me texts like, "There's a similar story to yours, Dean." I was like, okay, maybe. Yeah, because I wasn't always above board. I'd say my career was quite turbulent when I was in. But I was actually with the SS. I was in the SBS, which is a special boat service.
That's right.
Yeah, but coming from the army, I was one of the first army candidates to actually go SES. And for your listeners, unlike here in the US, where you have Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 with their own selection process, actually in UK, SES and SBS is joint anyway.
So you go through the same selection? You go through OTC the same way?
Yeah. So we literally, so you go to your unit, whatever unit you start off with, and a lot of the guys tend to come from tier 2 backgrounds, whether it's airborne or commandos. I came from the commando fraternity, and you only get 2 chances at selection, and so a lot of guys were going on selection not really knowing what to expect, and sort of either failing physically, navigationally stuff, or just weren't physically and mentally prepared in general. So what they now do is they do a briefing course. Each unit has then they're 1 week long. So you volunteer for that. You go down, you do a couple of loaded marches, you get a bit of exposure, what to expect on selection. And then once you pass that, they then put you on the course. So you have to decide whether you're going SAS or SBS at that point. But the courses are run twice a year, one in the winter, one in the summer, but both units come together. And the chief instructor will rotate every 2 or 3 years. It'll either be an SBS chief instructor or be an SAS, but actually the standards are aligned throughout.
That's interesting. I remember I watched that. It's so. By the way, they have another 6 episodes coming out this year sometime. I don't know when. So that's going to be fucking fun. But David Sterling, the guy who was the founder of the SAS, and then I guess by proxy the founder of the SBS as well, because he founded the whole org. Is a friggin' maniac. I mean, this guy, let's walk back in history a little bit. Benjamin Franklin, I think, was the first person to write down that it might be something to drop troops into combat from the air. I think he mentioned hot air balloons or balloons just in general. Wow. But I'm pretty sure David Sterling was the first person, at least at the soft level, to make it happen. So he goes on a jump. I don't know if he burned in or if his chute malfunctioned some other way, but he basically broke his back, and then he went on the next jump as well. It's like, this guy's a fucking lunatic.
Yeah, it is, and obviously you've seen the parachute training now when you're in the flight swings. I mean, you come down on these pulley systems before you even actually jump out of a plane. In them days, they were just throwing them off the back of 4-ton trucks. And the thing is, when you do land, they tell you to twist and turn. If you do it incorrectly, you break your ankle. So yeah, those guys. Yeah, those guys were hardcore. It wasn't a fact, of authenticity and entertainment with that series. That was generally all authentic.
Yeah, and then I think of Jacques Luz, who is I think he epitomizes the early days of special operations because We did it with The Dirty Dozen. I'm sure you're familiar with that movie from back in the
Yes.
day. But it's
Yeah.
just like good dudes, but maybe not for public consumption. You know what I mean? Like break in case of emergency type of people.
Yeah.
It was madness. At any rate,
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that shit. So you've got a lot of stuff going on since the last time we spoke. You've done a couple of things. One of them is extracting people from the conflict in Israel. Can you tell me about how that all went down?
Yeah, so for your listeners, in the past, I've done a number of high-profile evacuations. In 2012, when your American ambassador was killed in Benghazi, I was there that evening, and I evacuated an oil company from Benghazi to Tripoli. 2 years later, I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya, 18 military and 4 diplomats, and then a couple of years passed, helped with the evacuations in Afghanistan. So it's something I'm quite familiar with. But actually, on October the 7th, when it all started unfolding in Israel, I was actually in Disneyland with my wife. And, I was starting to get texts already. And then the next morning, woke up and a good friend of mine, his auntie and uncle from Sri Lanka, they were on a holiday in Bethlehem, and he was quite concerned about them. And as I'm watching the news, my wife and I work together, and she sort of runs and coordinates all the planning, and I tend to go on the ground and do the evacuations themselves. What was unique about this one, though, compared to the others, I'd been to Afghanistan, I'd been to Libya, I hadn't actually been to Israel before, and so my wife said, "I think you need to get in there." So she bought me a ticket. I was supposed to fly that evening on Turkish Airlines. Quite rapidly, all the flights started getting cancelled. A lot of the American airlines were cancelling their flights. And so I got turned away from the airport. But as we were heading back down to Orange County, we found a flight with El Al, which is an Israeli airline, because they were looking to get as many Israelis back. And yeah, I managed to get on that flight, flew in. Unlike the previous evacuations, I already had clients in place. I already had safe houses, security guys. I didn't have anyone going in. My wife then messaged some people we knew from the Jewish community, letting them know I was coming in. By the time I landed 13 hours later, we had 63 families that needed assistance. And so unlike the others, I was doing it reverse. I was basically designing the evacuation plan when I was on the ground. I had a couple of security contacts, and we just built it out. Because I understood the nuances from the previous evacuations, we were just doing it as it unfolded. And actually, when I arrived, as you can imagine, within 24 hours, 36 hours of the Hamas incidents on October 7th, it was relatively calm. There was an element of shock within the Jewish community, rightly so. But actually, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem were very safe places. There was a high presence of armed police everywhere. So it probably was quite a safe environment. The issue we were dealing with was the fact that flights kept getting cancelled a lot. And so it was just trying to get these people on additional flights. So there was chartered flights that we could get hold of, and my wife was sort of coordinating that. But also, I'd just finished filming in Jordan, and so we had great fixers in Jordan. We knew everyone through the colonels in the special forces all the way up to King Abdullah. And we were getting also people across the border to Jordan, across the King Abdullah Bridge, and people out of Amman. And so within a space of a week, we managed to get 220 people out of Israel. The issue we had there, actually, a lot of people were quite happy to stay there. What you had the media monster, as I call it, portraying that the whole of Israel was at war, when actually it was only a small contained area around Gaza. And so you had, obviously, rightfully so, worried families wanting to get their families out. And then when I'm actually speaking to the families on the ground, they're actually, no, we're happy to wait. So you're sort of dealing with that as well. I said, well, I think you might have to speak to your son, because he's quite worried back in New York and wants you out as soon as possible. But I saw during that period, I saw the good and the bad in social media. I broke protocol. I very rarely let people know that I'm doing anything, especially high profile like that. But going in, and we didn't have clients, we also wanted to let people know that I was there. So we reached out to a couple of the big military podcasters, Jack Carr, Sean Ryan, Jocko, and they were sharing the posts. And actually, I got a message from a lady, Elizabeth. Her and her husband are pastors that work in the old city of Jerusalem and run a Bible college. and they had 15 students, 14 Americans, one Indian, and all their flights had been cancelled. They're under a lot of pressure from the families to get them out, and they'd exhausted all their options. And so she saw Jocko, she follows Jocko, saw his post, and then reached out on Instagram. And within 45 minutes, I was in the old city of Jerusalem with them, having a cup of tea, planning to get them out. And then 48 hours later, we managed to get all 15 out at no cost on chartered flights. So yeah, that's what I say. I see the good and the bad in social media during that trip.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's it kind of seems like with some of the operations that happened in Afghanistan, including Save Our Allies and some others, you guys. And then moving forward, there was some issues in Sudan not too long ago that we had to get some people out. Some issues in Haiti recently that we had to get some people out. And then obviously Israel. It kind of seems, I bet, to the casual observer that this is a relatively new thing, but this has actually been going on for quite a while. Private organizations run by veterans extracting people out of war zones. And when I say quite a while, I mean like since World War II, it's been going on, right? Now, a lot of the times it's religious charities and stuff like that doing the work. But this is like, I don't know how to make or how to say this, but the government can't always do the job, right? Like it's a big, slow moving behemoth. They've got a lot of rules and stuff like that. Whereas, if you send a targeting officer and an operator in somewhere, they're going to beg, borrow, and steal their way out no matter what, right? So I just think it's probably like a lot of people talk shit about the government, like, oh, we had to do this because the government couldn't. It's like, certainly that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't want to. It's just like a different job with a different skill set.
Yeah, I think it is. What I found, I got injured out in 2011, and I've actually done more sensitive jobs as a civilian than I have when I was actually in Tier 1 Special Forces. And it's not because they're more dangerous. Actually, no, it's not the case. It's just that when, as a civilian, you're not then governed, you're not being told where to go and what to do, because obviously, when you're representing a country and a government, you have to be very careful about how it looks and how it can be portrayed. And so, yeah, the government use guys like us, ex special forces, because we have the skill sets, we have the networks, and we can actually do stuff which wouldn't potentially compromise them. And so, yeah, we just have a bit more flexibility. I have to sometimes remind myself that, when I'm doing some of these, what I don't have is that top cover. If it does go wrong,
Yeah.
You don't have those guys, your friends coming in, parachuting in to get you. And so I think that's where a lot more planning comes in place. As I said, we have the skill sets, we know what we're doing. We just need to make sure that you have a sturdy plan. For me, where I've been successful in this is I find that again, people are blaming governments, but I also sort of put a bit of blame on some of these insurance companies as well. A lot of these people, these big corporates, NGOs, will have insurance evacuation plans in place, but they haven't really read their terms and conditions. They haven't really understood, what you're getting for your buck. And it tends to be that these insurance companies will provide an aircraft to get you out, but you need to get to that airspace.
Sure, yeah.
So there's been evacuations where actually it's kicked off. You're 90 miles away and you need to get to the aircraft. So where I focus on, I call it the first mile. I don't really focus about the airspace. Once I've got you to that airhead, you're good to go. So I work on the first mile from your start point to the airhead, and then all the safe houses in between. But yeah, I think I noticed that in Afghanistan, a lot of guys and girls and organizations were caught out because they thought they had insurance in place. But actually, when they looked deeper into it, didn't have what they thought they were covered for.
Yeah, that was a big problem in Haiti a couple months ago for some of my people. Mostly, there were a lot of different people down there. There were science teams, there were O&G people down there, and some others, some NGOs as well. And the problem is they were in Port-au-Prince, right, or in that general area, which is where most people are, but that port was fucked. Like there's no way to get in and out of that necessarily without getting into a gunfight, especially if you're a bunch of white people.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of people had to find their way to Labadee in the north, right, which is basically a resort town. To be honest, like I know people don't think of Haiti as having a resort town, but that's basically what that is.
Mm.
Yeah, and it was a big issue for the people that
Yeah.
even the people that had insurance because they were calling some of my buddies that do this kind of work for corporate America, right? And their fee is like 750K typically to get. It depends on the amount of people and what the conditions are, but that's a good starting rate, right?
Yeah.
And the insurance does not cover that, right? Not even close actually. They'll cover like some level of security in an airplane, but that's about it. Like a chartered airplane doesn't cost that much money. We're talking about somewhere. It depends on where in the world it is, but like 15 to 50K probably. That's nothing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
to these people. Yeah, so I recommend if you're out there and you're doing stuff in dangerous areas and you think you have insurance, you better maybe have an attorney look over that paperwork and see exactly what services you're getting provided with.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the big corporate, some of the organizations. So I sometimes come in and I'll pen test their evacuation plans as well, because a lot of them tend to, it's only as good as the paper it's written on.
Mm.
Actually probably hasn't even been activated. I remember, I went to one out in Latin America, a big mining company, and sat down with the security manager, and I said, "Oh, can I review evacuation plan?" So he sent it out. I was reading through it, and he pretty much he planned his route on Google Earth. I could see what he'd done, and so I said, "But there was only one route. That was it. There wasn't a secondary or a tertiary contingency." So I looked at the weather, and it was going to be raining the next day. So I said, "Oh, do you mind if we take this route tomorrow?" And he's like, "Yeah, perfect." But knowing for a fact it was a muddy road, it wasn't even passable. And so a lot of them tend to do the box ticking exercise. Yeah, we have an evacuation plan in place, but it actually hasn't been updated or
No.
hasn't even been tested as well. So you have to be mindful of that. I'd say to some of these organizations as well. If you are working with other security providers, review their evacuation plan, ask them questions,
Mm.
test them, because typical on the day of the race, when you need it, it will be raining.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, and you don't know like, especially if you're in even a soft conflict zone where there are military checkpoints and stuff like that. Are they still in the same place they were when you made the plan? People, we run into that issue as well, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh shit, they're starting to like, because you obviously you're trying to stay off main roads and things like that.
Yeah.
But just because it's a shithole country doesn't mean the people there are stupid, right?
I know.
They've been existing for a long time, just like you have. So,
Yeah.
um,
And
uh,
and I think with me, I use 75% of my time, I will use locals,
mhm.
because as you know, it's their country. They know it better than you. They understand tribal influences. They understand that, for example, when I did the Benghazi one, I couldn't. We've got used the Benghazi drivers to get us out of Benghazi, but actually put us in a safe house down in Zella, about 4 hours out, because I knew, we knew, because my local influence, that we can't use those to go to Tripoli. We couldn't go through Misrata and Tripoli because they're going to bring attention to us. So having that sort of local knowledge is paramount. And all the safe houses we have are provided by locals. But yeah, as you said, they know that country better than you. And so, be reliant on them. There's 25% of information that I obviously can't give them, a bit more sensitive, but what you can give them, then do it. And if they see that you're putting food and drink on the table for them and their families, they want it to be a success. They don't want that to fail as well.
Yeah, 100%. Um, you got some other stuff going on. You mentioned that you're going to have another world record attempt sometime soon. When is that, and what is it exactly?
Yeah, so back in 2018, I cycled world's longest road. Never cycled before. Cycled 14,000 miles and broke two world records. Became the first man in history to cycle under 100 days. So I always like to, when I get time, is to set myself on a new challenge and always get back on a philanthropy angle, but also take a sport that I've never done before. So I've done cycling. I've enjoyed that. So I now started looking at rowing. Originally, I was going to be kayaking the River Nile in Africa. I know every time I go to open that folder and it slams shut with something, whether it was COVID, moving to America, and now there's a war in Sudan. So that one day that book may open. But we're looking one on ocean conservation, and it's ocean rowing. And it's actually going to be me and my wife, and we're going to row the west coast of America. It's never been done before. So from probably going to start in Seattle and finish down in San Diego, or we may push it further from Vancouver down to Tijuana. So we'll be setting off in the summer of next year. So at the moment, we're just putting all the planning together, purchasing the boat from UK, getting that shipped over. So yeah, you'll see my body shape changing again from a cyclist to a rower. But I sort of joke, my wife never didn't marry me because I looked like Chris Froome as a cyclist.
What kind of boat do you use for that?
So they're actually classed as ocean rowing boats. 2 seconds, sorry, bins are getting empty. They're classed as ocean rowing boats. They're about I'd probably say about 35 foot long. They have the cabin on both ends, and the rowers are sat in the centerpiece. But you have somewhere obviously to sleep, to have a toilet. You have in the other cabin, you have where your food and navigational equipment, your communication equipment. So these boats, there's a famous race, it's called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, which runs from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean. And there's one that's just started last year, which is going to be an annual event here in the US from Monterey to Hawaii. So these boats need to withstand some big ocean waves, and obviously you need to be self-sufficient as well for long periods of time. So they're robust enough for that.
And how long do you expect this to take?
That's the $1 million question. I'm working with a friend of mine, Chris Martin. He's the vice president of the Ocean Rowing Society. So obviously we need to identify a start point, a finish point. But for me, you want to be. Ideally, I want to be doing it in about 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, yeah. But if the winds and the tides are in our favor, then we hope to go faster. So I always start with a reasonable number. Obviously, as I start going and I get an average of what we can do and perform, I push it. So it's a bit like my bike ride. The world record was 117 days, and I was aiming for 110 days. Still a big chunk, but I actually did it in 99 days. So I'll always aim off, give myself a bit of fudge.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that'll be fun, I guess, or not. It's going to be one of the two, right?
Yeah, well, I think the reason for this and the reason for doing it with my wife as well is when I did the bike ride, people from the because of special forces background, everyone was like, well, he's special forces, of course he can do it. Well, I wasn't a cyclist, I got injured. I'm told I could never run again, and I probably know about 99% of the soft community probably couldn't do that bike ride. So it sort of gets overlooked, which is fine. But my wife's like, well, no, it's a huge achievement, and I was like, yeah. And so with this one, I always talk about the mindset, the approach, the training, and everything else. And so if it was to me, if I was to do the ocean road myself, people are like, well, of course he can do it. He's got previous. So I'm taking my wife, and my wife's done absolutely zero training in her life. Unfortunately, she got burnt by a kettle when she was 9 years old, spilled some water on her. And so she spent 18 months in a compression vest in the hospital. So when all her friends were learning to ride bikes, starting to get into PE, PT at school, she was sort of restricted from that. But academically, took off. And more recently, she's had an operation to release her shoulder where it was tightened. And now she can obviously extend her arm fully. So I'm basically taking a blank canvas and then hopefully becoming the first people ever to row the west coast of America.
Sure. That'll be fun. I mean, so that's the most British injury of all time. To get burned by a friggin' tea kettle as a child.
Yeah. That's very British. Yeah.
It's like you slip on a crumpet or something. That's a muffin for you American folks.
A muffin, yeah. Her grandfather was a merchant navy. He used to love making things, and he'd make his own stuff. I think he made a three-legged stool, and she was in the kitchen, pouring it, and then the leg went on the stool and it went down her chest. So,
yeah, well, that's going to be a fucking experiment right there. But the good news is it's tabula rasa. Like, you're not going to have to unbreak any bad habits. So that's good. She's a pretty smart lady too, so I'm sure she's going to figure it out.
Yeah, she'll work it out. She's smart.
So you've been. I wanted to ask you about the extractions and stuff that you've been doing over the past. What is it? 10 years now, 11, 12 years, something like that. And then in your military service as well, you've been to a lot of places, some of them nice, some of them not so nice.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that like to complain in the U.S. about how things are going here. And fair enough, right? Like you should definitely just because somewhere else is worse, not capitulate to less than good in your own
Mm.
place. Obviously, you should take care of your country and stuff.
Awesome.
But I wonder, I think about this as somebody who's got a lot of education personally. Um, we're teaching people in a weird way, and I don't mean just in university. It's obvious that it's happening in university, right? Because you see these kids with no life experience who think they've got it all figured out, and maybe that's just the hubris of youth. But I also don't like the way, and it's the case in the UK as well. I've learned from some of my UK friends. I'm not terribly fond of the way that we teach. And here in the States, you start learning a foreign language somewhere between 14 and 16, right? Which is an
Yeah.
impossible age to learn a language. You can't.
Yeah.
Um, and then we do very little in the way of practical life training or in like community service. In
Mm.
when I'm talking about primary education, so high school, as we would call it
Yeah.
here. My idea has always been, and I wonder from your perspective, since you've been to all these shithole places, just to give kids some perspective. I don't know if sending them, well, definitely not sending them into conflict zones, but I do think there's something about organizations like the Peace Corps that give people a little bit of perspective on how good they have it, right? And it seems
Yeah.
like waiting until later in life to do it might not be the best idea. I think that we should move language education back to like first, second, third grade.
Yeah.
And then high school, for those additional credits in high school, you've got to do some local community service, but in a community that's not your own, preferably, right? So you
Yeah.
just get a bit of cultural understanding. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I agree on all the above. And I think we are seeing a culture. It's almost like selfishness. Me and my wife were talking about it the other day. Just chivalry, just basic chivalry's disappeared. And I mean, when you do open the door, you then get criticized. But yeah, there's a lot that can be learned from the past. We're now in a digital age. Everyone wants it quick, and they want it now, and they don't want to work hard for it. But you don't get anywhere without working hard. The Peace Corps is a great idea. I actually was on a podcast last week. With a guy from the Swedish Special Forces who visited, and they were conscripts. Some of these European, especially Scandinavian countries, still have conscripts, which I still think is a great idea. I think because you are still too young. I joined the army at 17. I still didn't really know what I was doing until I was about mid 20s, and so use that period of time. Just get the basic chivalry, just basic being a basic human being again, being polite to other people. Because I do think it's lost. I do think social media doesn't help matters. As I touched earlier on in this, I've seen the good and the bad in social media. But yeah, languages. We have a nanny here for our 18-month-old daughter. She's a Mexican nanny, and she only speaks Spanish to our daughter. Our daughter is already picking up a second language, and it has to be at a younger age as well, because you are still developing and you pick up new things. And I think I did hear that if you can have a second language by the time you're age of 12 or 13, then you can have numerous languages. It's always hard to understand that first one. But that's one of the things I used to find difficult when I used to go to these places, as you touched on, where life isn't that good, and you see children, generally children with nothing, but they're the happiest ever, the happiest kids ever. They're hitting a stick on a wheel, running down the streets, and then they actually don't know if they're going to be fed that night. They have no electricity, but sometimes back to the basics. I mean, you come back to either to the US or to the UK, and you see people arguing about the smallest of things, the most, these first world problems. But it's hard because it's hard for me to try and educate them, if they don't really understand. But I think if they've had exposure at a younger age, or like you said, go on some of these Peace Corps trips, that's when they then get understanding. And it's about educating other people on that as well. But yeah, we're in a difficult situation, and there is a steep curve of change, but I think we can sort of level that, and if we start introducing some of those things back.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea of learning language at an early age, one, it does work. What you're saying, learning a second language before 12 does make you more capable of learning other languages moving forward. But you also learn a lot about the culture, right? Because especially as a kid, because idioms don't translate from one language to another very well, right? Like informal sayings, if you will.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, as you're learning, you have to look into the actual definition of the word or the phrase, what it really means to them, right? Because there's a lot of one of the problems that we've had communicating overseas is that we use slang and shorthand a lot and idioms, and people are like, "What the fuck are you? What does that have to do with anything?"
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I think that's a really good way of learning another culture is, especially at a young age, is kind of to try to figure out what the hell people are talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I think for me, when I used to I do travel security training as well, and one of the topics is culture. It's just being educated, or just having an understanding that not everywhere is like the UK and the US. You know, things are done differently for a reason, and that's what tends to get a lot of people in trouble. It's that almost that ignorance that they haven't spent time to understand about their cultures. You know, it's not because they don't like Brits or Americans. It's just because of the way that they act when they're in their countries, and also that has to be reciprocated. No, they need to act, as you guys do. So, yeah, that's one area that I do cover a lot on. And there's the normal basic procedures about security, being situation aware, what to look out for, blah blah blah. But actually, one of my biggest topics is culturally aware. You know, just things you don't really expect. You know, for example, like Saudi. If you are a Christian and you have a Bible, it's fine. You can take it to Saudi. But if you have more than one Bible, they're going to class you as a preacher and you're going to get arrested. It's just simple things that you
Mm.
wouldn't even think of. So I always say to people when you go into these countries, just spend a bit of time, have a look at the rules and their guidelines as well. But if you have experienced time as a youth traveling, you are a bit more culturally aware than those that haven't actually been anywhere before, and also understand that what happens here in the US isn't the same. It don't have the same jurisdiction in some of these other countries. I've seen occasions where people, they have the magazines in their bags, wondering why they're getting arrested at
Mm.
airports. So it's that because you're no longer in the US, So yeah, there's a little bit of education, but also both ways.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the other things you've been working on is um, a new Netflix show that comes out. I think this will air next week, so it comes out the week that this airs.
Yeah.
And it's Toughest Forces on Earth. What's that about?
So it's basically myself and two co-hosts, we go around the world and we basically showcase what's unique about the special forces in that country. We visit 8 countries. We visit USA, Mexico, Colombia, Austria, Sweden, Jordan, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And really, it's just to showcase, what is it's unique about that special forces, whether it's geographically where they're placed. They may be in a volatile region, for example, like Jordan, or they may be in the Arctic in Sweden. And so, operating in those environments, what the threats are to those countries, their selection processes. And myself and the two co-hosts, Ryan's a SEAL and Cam's an ex-Ranger, and we basically get immersed in their training, do training from for a few days, and then they do a final mission profile. And the great thing about this show is, like, one episode we're in Sweden doing the SEER course in the Arctic Circle, falling through the ice and trying to survive a few nights in the Arctic. And then the next one we're in the blistering desert of Jordan down in Wadi Rum. And so yeah, it's a great show. It's the first of its kind on Netflix. Netflix took a bit of a gamble on this. I know Netflix have been criticized in the past on what some of the stuff that they've aired, and so I think this will center that needle. So I know they put a trailer out last week, and within 5 days, it had 1 million views and all been positive comments. So I'm excited for it, but I think gives the general public an understanding of what else the special forces does. Hollywood doesn't help matters. I call it the biceps, bullets, and the bombs. It's always the exciting stuff that you see. But you don't see the hard stuff. You don't see the selection pros. Don't see yourselves sleeping on the jungle floor at night, or trying to survive in the Arctic. So it gives people a bit more exposure about the soft community.
Yeah, and I don't think is there a part in it where you talk about SBS and things like that? Because I don't think most people, well, I don't think most Americans know much about SAS, to be honest, but they certainly don't know what SBS even is.
Yeah, no, we don't really get a chance to talk about, we say that where we've come from,
Hmm.
but no, we don't really get to talk about that. But also, people don't then realize, we talk a little bit about the tier systems in the special forces community, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. So we sort of go into a little bit about that, but it's really not so much about myself and the two hosts. It's about the unit
Mm.
that we're visiting. And so for I think I don't know if you've ever seen Top Gears.
Hmm.
Yeah, so basically, I think the commissioner from this was the commissioner from that back in
Okay.
2005. So originally it started off as one host. When it's a British production company, they have a show called Inside the World's Toughest Forces, which is on its Inside the World's Toughest Prisons, which is on its seventh season now. And so it was just originally on that same concept with one host going in and visiting these units. And my name got put in over 3 years ago, and then it went down from 150 candidates to me, and I was like, oh, perfect, but it didn't make sense to me because I was like, well, I hadn't done any TV at that point. And they said, well, you look like you're one of the fittest. So I'm then thinking to myself, am I actually doing selection 8 times over here or not? And then in the end, Netflix were like, well, we're thinking more of an American. And so I had to go to Dallas and do a chemistry test with 4 other Americans. And yeah, I ended up, picking Ryan, who's a Navy SEAL. And then right at the 11th hour, they're like, it doesn't work with two hosts. We need to have three.
Mm.
And so they found this YouTuber, a guy Cameron Plath, been in the Rangers for 4 years. And he sort of brings the youth to the group. So originally, I won't lie, at the beginning, I was like, how's this going to work? But now that I've seen it unfold, yeah, it does work well with three guys, 3 different backgrounds, 3 different types of experiences.
Yeah, and it's not just, by the way, some of the shows that have come out in the past that are somewhat similar to this have been a lot of B-roll footage, a lot of infographics and stuff. But
Yeah.
from the trailers, you can tell you guys actually get into the shit, fire all the weapons, do all the crazy bullshit. So it's going to be, I mean, it must have been challenging to film all that in the first place.
Yeah, it was. I'm 47 years old. I didn't think I'd be falling through the ice again or firing doors or doing spy rigging again. So for
Yeah.
me, it was great. For me, I thoroughly enjoyed the show because when I was in, I won't lie. For me, it was the SBS, the SES, Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. They're pretty much the units I worked with and I sort of focused on. And it wasn't because I was being arrogant. I didn't really have much exposure or awareness of all these other units around the world. It's only when I left the military I had more of an intrigue into military history and other units. So for me, it was great to see some of these units, and as you'll see on the show, there's a lot of lineage with the USA and the UK. Literally, all these units we visit have been trained by the US or the UK Special Forces. So
Hmm.
there's that common ground. And Ryan, he's a SEAL. He's about 42 years old, so he's a little bit older as well. But then you've got Cameron, who's the young guy, the young ranger. So for myself, I think everything bar the swamp survival I'd done before in my career. So it was a bit of a refresher for me. Whereas Cameron, everything we were doing was for the first time. So for him, he was loving it. He
Hmm.
never managed to get to do all that when he was in the Rangers himself. So for him, it's that first exposure, and
Yeah.
and you can see how he's loving it and how he's really he's dived into things. So yeah, I see how it works. I'm almost like the grumpy Jeremy Clarkson,
Hmm.
go down to the young guy.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know Fath his or know his YouTube channel, he's a total fucking military dork too. Like he's a huge nerd
Oh,
on all that stuff. So I'm sure he had a lot of fun with that. Um,
yeah,
what were what units really impressed you, either with the selection process or their capabilities, more generally speaking?
um, the two the two standouts for me were the Colombian Junglar police because actually it's because they're police
Mm.
and these guys were probably more equipped and more trained than any some of the other soft units that I've seen around the world. But I always had to sort of remind myself that actually they're law enforcement first. These guys are skydiving in, they're going on operations,
Yeah,
and they're
there were some of
actually,
those dudes at my fucking airborne school class. Like, no
yeah,
shit.
yeah,
I was like, what the fuck? I was like, Columbia military, cool. And like, no, they're cops. I'm like, all right, I guess that makes sense. Well, it's
yeah,
Columbia.
yeah.
It's a shit show down there.
Colombia. but they're getting rounds down the range pretty much every week. They're literally out the door all the time, and so that for them the conflict, as you know, when we go to conflicts, it tends to be it's overseas, and then you can return home. For
Mm.
them, it's on their doorstep, and so for me, that was a real eye opener. In their capabilities and their professionalism, being police, but the fact that they're actually getting rounds down every day. And the other one for me, it was the only tier one unit we visited on this season, and it was the Austrian Jag Commando. And for me, again, it was the fact that I'd never even heard of these guys. But when I got there, you could see, these guys do cross training with the SBS and the SES. These guys were units. They were solid. There's a scene where I go through the killing house with them, which is great. But I'm sure they picked, in the team, everyone's at least 6'2" and up to 6'5", and I'm just slotting in the middle as this SBS guy. But yeah, their capabilities were great. But obviously, because of their history with Austria, with the Second World War, with Hitler, they've had to remain neutral. But actually, their capabilities, yeah, they match all the other tier one units.
I wasn't aware that Austria had a tier one unit. Are they counterterrorism? What do they do? What's their specialty?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do counterterrorism. They're actually on operations in Afghan in Africa. But yeah, they have the full counterterrorism capabilities. And obviously, being in Austria, their Alpine capabilities are second to none. These guys, there's a scene with one of the lead climbers. He's got, we're climbing with the Bergens on the back, and this guy's literally, flying up the side of this rock. Whereas me, Cameron, and Ryan, to talk about 3 points of contact, I mean, we must have had about five. What I mean, trying to get up this thing. But yeah, no, they're full counterterrorism capabilities.
Are they? Do they work with GSG 9 or is it completely set? They're not like because just from for the listener's perspective. All our tier one units were basically modeled after your guys' tier one units. Colonel Charlie Beckwith went over and served, I think, in 71 and 72 with 22nd SAS for a while. Came back and started writing white papers on why we needed a CT unit and blah, blah, blah. The rest is history. I wonder if this isn't the same because I don't know who got started first. I'm looking at their Wikipedia page for the commando unit, and they were founded in 1962, which is quite a bit prior to anything we were doing in the U.S. here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when GSG 9 was founded, but they've been around for a while as well.
Been around, yeah. I think, as you said, I think a lot of it originates from the UK. Yeah, I don't know what the threats were to Austria back in the 60s for them to sort of ramp that up.
Yeah,
I know
that's 10 years before GSG 9
yeah,
was 72, so that's 10 years before.
yeah. But when was the Munich? When was the because there was a lot of aircraft hijackings, weren't there, in Europe and stuff back in the 70s?
Yeah, the Munich massacre was in 72, which is interesting. Interestingly, that's when GSG 9 got stood up. I think they already had because GSG 9 is police as well. They're not military, so
No.
which is different. Like GI, I think GIGN is military, right? If I'm not
That's it.
mistaken.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the country, but yeah, this one I think GSG 9 got stood up in response to the Munich massacre. Which or maybe not, but it would be quite a coincidence that it happened later that same year.
Yeah. It'd be interesting. I'll try and find out what it was. Jag Commando means hunter commando. That's what it means. But for them,
I like
but
that. I like that.
yeah,
I mean, but it seems based on I'm looking through their training and stuff like that, and you're talking about what we would call cross country stuff, and that kind of reminds me of the Finnish and Norwegian special operators because they do like legit cross country skiing, shooting from skis and stuff like that is wild as hell.
yeah. Well, actually, of the three of us, when we go to Sweden, I was an Arctic warfare instructor and did my military ski instructor because back in the UK, because I was at the commando forces, the Royal Marines and the commandos, we used to go to Norway every year for 3 months. So we always do the Arctic training because post Second World War, should there be a threat from Russia and they start moving west, the British commandos would then go to Norway and hold the front with them there. So I'd had exposure of that, and I think Cameron and Ryan go off and learn how to ski. And yeah, there's me then getting into the fire positions because doing contact drills in the snow is like the 25% of the speed that you would do on a normal ground. So yeah, it's great. But yeah, those guys that operate either in the Alpine or in the Arctic. Yeah, their training's a roof.
That's wild. What about if things go well, do you get picked up again? Do you have a wish list of units that you would like to cover?
Yeah, I think there was we did eight, but there were others that were in the pipeline. What I see with this show is the fact that um, it's a huge recruitment platform. We
Mm.
did the US Navy EOD, and I was chatting to them, and you could see they were slightly hesitant. They're like, well, this is a Netflix show, what are we doing? But actually, when we filmed it, they loved it. They're like, yeah, we get it, we get the concept. And I said, look, if we get a second season, I have no doubt the US Army, the US Air Force will all be knocking on the door because recruitment globally, not just in the US, UK, everywhere is at an all-time low. Everyone's struggling. And so why would you not give it this exposure? There were other countries, I think, if I'm right in saying it might have been Japan, who were a bit hesitant because they didn't know the concept of the show. They thought we might make them look bad, which wasn't the case. And as you see on the show, it's really to showcase what's unique about it and how good they are. So I think there will be we get a second season. I think there'll be a lot of, we wouldn't need to go looking. I think there'll be a lot of people knocking on the door. But we did have Greece, we had Brazil, we had Japan. We did have actually Israel at one point, but obviously before the incident back in October. But yeah, I would ones that stand out for me. I'd like to go to Japan. That would be a good one. I'd like them to keep the same sort of structure. Do an Arctic, do a desert, do a
Mm.
jungle. Yeah, and
Yeah.
because as the jungles of South America are different from the jungles of Borneo down in Indonesia or some of the jungles in Africa. So although you go into those environments, they still are quite unique.
Yeah. I mean, tigers make them unique, and on that side of the world. And fuck that, by the way.
True.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So you don't hear much about the Japanese military, but they used to come every time. So in the infantry here in America, we do something called expert infantry badge. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's like the board of infantry sergeants major come up with 24, I think, tests that you have to do. How to, like, certain weapons platforms, all kinds of other bullshit, call for fire or everything. And then you obviously have to score high enough on a PT test, do a ruck march, all this stuff. The Japanese infantry used to come over pretty much every time we did it at Fort Bragg back in the day, and at least observe, if not put some of their guys, mostly young officers, through the course and stuff like that. And they
Yeah.
seemed pretty competent, to be honest. You just don't hear about them doing military operations much.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what surprised me is about the amount of units that are out there, and actually the cross training that they have with the UK and the US. When we went to the Philippines, it was their NAV summit, so it was their equivalent to Navy SEALs, and Ryan had spent a year there training with them as well. So yeah, they're a lot of them are very very capable. But the other standout as well. Sorry, just to jump in at the end is I'd probably say the third unit that impressed me was the Philippines as well. But these guys didn't have the budget that we're used to seeing in special forces communities, but the resilience that these guys were always smiling, and they were in the harshest of conditions, but these guys would still perform at the top end. So that was a big standout for me as well.
Yeah, people don't realize how dangerous the southern islands of the Philippines are. I mean, it's all Al Qaeda down there, or it has been for some time as well. It's very bizarre. It's like a narco terrorist and Al Qaeda down there.
Yeah,
Like, First
I think.
Special Forces Group goes over there, has been going over there regularly since the early 2000s, I think, just driving around, getting in gunfights everywhere.
Yeah, I think there's thousands of islands that they need to be
Mm.
sort of monitoring. Yeah, so again, that's a great thing about the show is just that exposure of what they're having to deal with, compared to what we're probably having to deal with as well. But I'm glad you mentioned Cameron. Cameron Pfaff earlier. When he turned up with his fucking nose ringing, I was like, "Who's this punk?" And it's young. He's like a pop idol. He should be on Pop Idol rather than Toughest Force on Earth. But actually, what that guy doesn't know about modern day equipment, you don't need to know. And like Ryan and I are old school. We used to like, yeah, we'll just go with this. And he's coming out with all these gadgets and gizzards. But he knew what he was doing with them. So that was another eye opener of how advanced some of the military equipment and clothing is, even in a short period of time that I've left.
Yeah, well, I mean, so give me an example. What's some new tech that wasn't around when you were in that's around now?
I wouldn't say it was just so much the tech. I think it was the weight of the equipment.
Mm.
You know, I'm talking when we were out in Afghan back in 2007. You probably got the first set of body armors that we were using, and
Like
they
shitty
were
shitty flak vests and stuff. It's
flat vest, yeah, probably the weight of this table and everything on.
yeah.
And then
I think the first one I wore, the first plate carrier I wore with the side plates and everything was 25 pounds, not including
yeah,
my ammo and shit, which is there's a lot of weight just to carry around like it's nothing.
it's a lot of weight. I mean, I remember they get Cameron gave me his plates, and I thought they were actually plastic. I thought
Yeah.
they were like, oh, these aren't robust. He said, no, 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 they work. I was like, really?
What were they made? Was it Dyneema or something? What was it made from?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I will have to get Cameron on to
Mm,
tell you. Yeah, he'll probably do a post about it anyway after this. But yeah, he was obviously getting kit in. I get sponsored by like 511 Tactical, so I was
mm,
using a lot of their stuff, which was great. He was with Haley Strategic, so
mm.
they were giving him some stuff. Even the actually probably more impressive was the Juggernaut phone case, which Cam got us all. You know, what I mean, I was like, "What are these?" And seeing them on the guys' body armors with the drop downs, just things like that. That wasn't that wasn't there 11 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Do you guys so special boat service would be akin to DevGru here?
yes,
Do you guys use SDVs as well?
yeah, yeah, yeah. We have our own STVs.
Oh, you got your own version of it. You don't use the US
Yeah,
version. So
oh
it's
no, we use the US version. We've just changed it from SEAL delivery vehicle to swimmer delivery vehicle.
oh well, that works, right?
Yeah, yeah. But the guys go out. They go out to Hawaii. They do the training
Mm,
with SEAL Team One, I think it is,
mm,
out there. Yeah, they do everything the same. What people don't really understand the difference between the SAS and the reason the SAS and the SBS train is like we don't have large numbers like the US at all. I probably think there's about 220 in the SBS and maybe 270 in the SAS, and that's complete. And we only have four Sabre squadrons and probably about 30 guys in each squadron. So because we're not that big, when it comes to certain operations, especially counterterrorism operations, we come together as units. So that's why the training, we've all
sure, yeah.
trained to, we know about the TTPs. The only real difference, a lot of people say, what is the difference? There's 97% commonality between both groups. The only difference, and the only difference, as you touched on, was the swim delivery vehicle, actually. The only real difference, if there's a hostage situation on an aircraft or an airport or a hotel, the SAS and SBS come together to build up the counter-terrorism numbers, but the operations run by the SAS. The management run that. But if there's a hostage situation on an oil rig or a cruise ship,
Hmm.
again, both units come together, but the SBS command take the lead. And the only real difference from your special forces is we do homeland terrorism as well. So we do
Hmm.
everything on case soil, which obviously you guys don't. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would love to see a series on or at least a full episode on SBS and what it is, because
Yeah.
and some of the because you guys have been involved in quite a bit of operations over the years. Like we kind of I think Americans in a lot of ways kind of started to lose track of what operations were going on after we drew down in Iraq and then had to go back to Mosul and a couple other places to get ISIS out of there. But SBS was involved in the ISIS fight for quite a bit. But also like Boko Haram and stuff like that. Like it was, I think you guys might have gotten more stuff done in Africa than we did, than our
Yeah,
people did.
we got a lot of stuff done. Again, people just when they think of the SAS is the big brother basically. But at the start of the Afghan war back in 2001, because as I said, I was one of the first army guys to go SBS. Prior to that, it was 100% Royal Marines, and Royal Marines commandos always do the Arctic training. They're the experts in mountain warfare, and so when 9/11 happened, I think SAS were in. Where were they? I think they were in Oman, and they thought that they were going to go straight to Afghan, and actually they flew the SBS straight in. They took hold of Afghan, and then as you had Iraq and Afghan wars running at the same time, to keep it simple, SAS operated in Iraq and SBS operated in Afghan. So all the Afghan operations were SBS, but you
Mm.
wouldn't have known that. And then as the Iraq war closed down, the SAS came in and we did our rotations with them.
Interesting, yeah. Before we get out of here, you've also got a book, Relentless. I think we talked about it the last time you were here, but give me the elevator pitch on that as well, in case anybody's in the market for a new book to read.
Yeah, so Relentless is it's almost in three phases. It's my childhood through to me joining the military. My father told me I'd last 2 minutes, and he was a military man himself, all the way up to selection. I don't go past selection, and I don't go into any of the operational sort of stories because I'm restricted. And then I talk about the private security sector. You know, some of the stories that we touched on here: evacuations from Benghazi, the Canadian embassy out of Libya. And then what I've sort of learned in those first two phases of the book, and then taking that into a world record sport that I'd never done before, and then obviously breaking the world record, which is the spoiler.
Yeah. And then what do you have coming up next? What should people be looking out for?
So we're looking at some more books. There'll be another follow up from Relentless, more evacuation stories,
Mm,
more world records. The website has just gone live now. We're on there. We've partnered up with Train Monkey Blades, so we have some blades there. We have the world record coming up next year. And you know, for us, we've just, as I touched on, we just got our green card for the US. You know, that was a lengthy process. That was a long process, nearly 4 years. So for that, that's the stability here. And you know, so we will. Yeah, we've got a few things coming up. Some I can talk about, some that I
mm,
can't. But anytime, you know, the phone could go off, and then there could be another crisis like in Israel. So, you know, I never make too many plans because
mm.
the phone tends to do that for me.
Yeah, for sure. What's the website, by the way?
It's deanstott.com.
Okay, Dean Stott. That's two T's. Well, technically three, but two in a row at the
Three, yeah,
end.
two at the end. Yeah, yeah, it's not
Um,
Scott.
and tell everybody where they can find you outside of the website.
So outside of the website, I am on Instagram,
Mm.
X. Instagram probably my main one, but you can get me or a contact page on the website as well.
Okay, great. Well, look, man, thanks for coming today. I appreciate the talk. It's
Thank you.
always interesting. I really hope that somebody does something on the SBS at some point.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that there's any series that's talked about it before. I mean, maybe mentioned it, but not like a full. Remember, like
Uh,
those shows um, on History Channel back in the day, Tactical to Practical, all those shows that taught us about weaponry and all this stuff, and then they did some about units as well. I don't think anybody ever did a full episode on SBS that I can
no,
remember.
but you talked about David Sterling founding the SBS. It
Mm.
wasn't actually David Sterling. It was but there's a movie. That's an old movie. It's called Cockleshell Heroes.
Wait,
Um,
say it again. What's it called?
Cockleshell
What
Heroes.
the hell is that? What cockle shell?
Cockle shell, yeah, cockle shell. So a cockle is like a little clam, but it's just called a cockle
Okay.
shell. The heroes, and basically it was back in the Second World War. It was the first ever operation for the SBS, and they were a lot of the German ships were in Bordeaux. A lot of the logistic ships, which was basically you know keeping the German machine moving
Mm.
in Europe. And so what they did is they pulled together again some like rogue heroes. They were going to go on this mission, and there were 10. We have Klepper canoes. They're World War II canoes with a wooden frame and a canvas around them, and we still use them now. And they're two-man canoes, and the five were going to deploy from a submarine at night, go into the Bordeaux River and put limpet mines on these ships. Well, two guys didn't deploy. There was something wrong with their canoe, and in the end, only two survived. But they still destroyed the ships. But they reckon just that one operation shortened the war by 6 months. And the two that escaped, they then escaped and evaded from France all the way through Spain. I think they stole a couple of push bikes, got to Gibraltar, and were sent home on that. So yeah, it's called Operation Frankton was the official name, if you look at that. But it's the very first operation from the SBS, and there's an old movie called Cockleshell Heroes, which goes into
And
that.
what's the guy's name? Is it Roger Courtney? Is that his name?
Oh, I'm not too sure. Major Hasler was the guy who
Hasler.
who
Okay,
led that. Hasler, he led that operation. Yeah.
sweet. Yeah, because I'm looking at there's a guy named Roger James Allen Courtney,
Mm.
who was one of the first SBS guys, and he was a bank clerk before the war.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, yeah,
As a matter of fact, I think he was a lower enlisted guy. He was a private or a corporal or some shit.
probably. Yeah,
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 that's crazy. I mean, that's how it is, though. A lot of people don't know that the U.S. Special Forces, a lot of the first members were like basically criminals from Europe. They were like European dissidents. They spoke the languages that we needed, so it was like, all right, let's look past the criminal record and let's
yeah.
get something going here.
Yeah, the French Foreign Legion always get the kudos for having the criminals, but actually they were in all the special forces units.
Yeah, for
Just
sure.
didn't advertise it.
Well, I mean, after the fact, it's good to advertise because it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Before the fact, it's like maybe a PR issue.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Amazing.
All right, cool. All right, well, thanks for coming today, man. I appreciate the chat. We're actually going to have you on Drinking Bros here in a little bit too, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Yeah,
Yeah, that'll be a less serious show. We're probably going to talk some shit over there.
excellent. Look forward to it.
All right, see you soon. Thank you, and thank you
Yeah,
all for
cheers,
listening.
Sam.
This has been Citizen.